One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode.
Hey there, quick question for you. Has 2020 shaken you up just a bit? Maybe you've realized the fragile nature of your job or current business. If so, you are definitely not alone. I've talked to so many in my community that feel the same. Over this past year, you might have found yourself wishing you had a proven path to a more resilient revenue stream, ideally one that lets you do what you love on your own timeline. Over a decade ago, I created my first digital course, and since then, the online learning market has taken off. And before I say too much, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Amy Porterfield, former corporate yes girl turned successful digital course creator and host of the Online Marketing Made Easy podcast. I never could have predicted that my decision to create a course would mark the beginning of my journey building an 8-figure business. I definitely never could have predicted that 2020 would be the year digital courses became more popular and more important than ever before, with millions of people learning from home. This is just the beginning, my friend. The online learning industry is on track to grow to $325 billion per year by 2025. And there's plenty room at the table for you to create and sell a course based on your own unique brand of brilliance. You don't need to know it all, be a tech wizard, have a huge audience, or have a master's degree in teaching. All you need is a 10% edge, which I can almost certainly guarantee you already have. If you're curious or committed to finding out how you could create a digital course one time that you can sell over and over again for year-round revenue, don't miss the free masterclass that I'm hosting live right around the corner. This masterclass is all about how to create and launch a profitable digital course from scratch. And in it, you'll discover the 5 behind-the-scenes secrets to generate revenue year-round. Just for showing up live, you'll get a free resource to support you in building your email list of potential customers who can't wait to become your first students. I would love to have you there because I know just how life-altering this opportunity could be for you. Even if you're not 100% confident that you could really create a successful digital course, do yourself a favor and show up. I've seen too many incredible business owners surprise themselves with what's possible to let you sit on the sidelines. Worst case scenario, you'll decide a digital course isn't for you, and you'll still walk away with an incredibly valuable resource to grow your email list. Best case scenario, you'll realize this whole digital course thing isn't rocket science and that you do have what it takes. I hope to see you there.
Okay, I know listeners of this podcast absolutely love a behind the scenes whenever it comes to how I set up my podcast, how I record, and all the things that are happening on my end. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that with you today. So I am actually in we have a guest room and it's upstairs, and my husband is at home. He's working in the office. The kids are downstairs, and I don't really understand what happened, but they just found like a trove of race car toys, or, like the motorized ones, like the remote control toys, cars, whatever they are. They're all screaming in the background. They are racing. I have literally poked my head out of here like 4 times before I even started recording and said, guys, can you please keep it down a little bit? Because Mama's got a podcast. And so if you hear a lot of that today, that is why. And I'm not going to apologize for it because that's just what we're dealing with today. But we are talking about something very, very important. And I'm glad that like today is the day, because I have teased this concept for about a month now. And it's funny because I don't technically, I'm not an overly emotional person, okay? But this podcast episode may be the one that breaks me. So I'm throwing it out there. Like, this is my disclaimer that I might get a little emotional during this episode, and I'm not going to apologize for that either. It is just my passion for podcasting really comes out in this today, because this is my why. We are talking about the ripple effect of podcasting, and I'm going to dive into what that means to me and how it shows up, how it is manifested in my life in so many incredibly amazing ways in the last year. And I'm just ready to dive right in. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so to really understand what we're talking about here today, whenever it comes to the ripple effect of podcasting, I wanted to explain what this means, because whenever I think of a ripple, I think of a pond. I grew up, I don't know if a lot of people know this. You may or may not. Maybe you've heard me tell this story, but we grew up on 250 acres of land. It was actually 500 acres. It was like 250 acres on one side of the highway and 250 on the other side of the highway. And my dad was the director of a summer camp. It was more than that. It wasn't just a summer camp, but I want that to like kind of be in your brain of like, okay, Crystal grew up at a summer camp until she was about 12, which is totally crazy, but it's how I grew up. So I grew up in the outdoors. Like, we just went outside and played. We didn't have neighbors. It was literally our family, and campers would come to stay on the campgrounds, either in the outdoor cabins or the indoor cabins. It's another reason why I love camping and being outdoors and hiking. still not a huge fan of fishing. Like I will go, but I do not want to take the hook out of the fish's mouth. I can't do it. I'm just like, I will catch them, but then you got to take them off the hook. But I bring all that up because whenever I think of a ripple, I think of skipping rocks or the really still, calm lake water that usually happens first thing in the morning. That's one of my favorite things to do when we go on vacation near water. I love going out and I do my writing and I just sit and I look at the water when it looks like glass. Oh my gosh. Like you want to talk about serenity and just pure peace. That's what I think of. But when I think of a ripple effect, and it doesn't have to be a big ripple, okay? I'm not talking about the ocean and big waves. I'm talking about a small ripple. I imagine something as small as a dragonfly touching the water as they fly over this glass lake. And the type of ripple, those little bitty waves that you see. I hope that you're visualizing this right now. So imagine just like a glass lake and just a small ripple coming out from either a rock or a pebble or even a tiny dragonfly. Okay. I want you to imagine, and I'm going to have to draw up something. Maybe I'll take a picture because I have this written in my notes. It's like a terrible drawing. I have horrible handwriting and I don't draw very well, but I have what is your podcast in the center. So I want you to imagine this glass lake and dropping a pebble in, and the pebble is your podcast. And the ripples that come out of that podcast, and it goes from the rock to one listener to another listener to another listener. Now, you can think of this as how you actually build your podcast audience, right? Like you put it out into the world, and then all the people that normally listen to your show, those are your listeners, and you can consider that one ring of the ripples that come out from you putting your podcast out into the world. But instead of that, today, I want you to imagine you sharing your podcast to one person, and then that one person really, really needed to hear your message. And so they hear it. They're touched by it, they're informed by it, they're educated by it, or they're just simply entertained by it. And then they share your podcast with someone else who is also touched by it, moved by it, educated by it, and they share it with someone else. So this is where the ripple effect of podcasting really comes into play. And I got to be honest, like this is my why for why I continue to do this podcast and why I continue to show up every single week. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, like, even though I'm so spunky when it comes to podcasting and I love podcasting, I love talking about it, there are days in the calendar when I sit down and I think, oh my gosh, the last thing I have time for or I really want to do today is sit and record a podcast episode, especially during quarantine. It's been extra taxing having 3 kids at home. And like I said, there's loud toys going on in the background and they're screaming and they're playing and they're just being kids. But, I have this idea of how I want everything to go with this podcast, and it doesn't always end up that way. But those days, I remember my why. And my why is the emails and the messages and the DMs and all the different ways that I've had people reach out to me and say, oh my gosh, I was totally lost trying to figure out my podcast and you made it look so easy. Or you helped me finally understand this one thing that I just could not wrap my head around. It's those messages that keep me going on days when I'm just like, oh my gosh, I want to do anything but record a podcast today. So the ripple effect of podcasting, and it goes so much deeper than and I don't want to call it petty, but I want to say my surface level subject of podcasting. right? Because it's not petty. Like this is awesome. I hope that you're here to learn how to run an online business or to grow your business or to start one or to add a podcast to the mix of your marketing strategy for whatever you're creating. But let's be honest, this is not the work of some of the podcasters that I have spoken to, and that's what I want to talk about today. I'm actually going to give a huge shout out to 3 members of the Potty People community. So I'm going to share a little bit about their story and their podcast, but I just really wanted to dive into the ways that podcasts can really impact other people. And it's going to blow your mind. Like it really is, because maybe you've been listening to some podcast and you've felt this way. You're like, oh my gosh, this one show has absolutely transformed my life. It's helped me save my sanity, save my marriage, save me money, help me invest my money or make smart decisions with my business or help me parent my children. I don't know all the reasons that you listen to podcasts, but most of those are the reasons why I listen to them. I've listened to podcasts that have made me cry. I've listened to podcasts that have inspired me. I've listened to ones where I've literally laughed so hard out loud and was embarrassed because everyone's kind of looking at me like I'm laughing at myself and I have to point to my ears like, oh no, like I'm listening to something. Like I'm not just a crazy person laughing over here in the corner. I'm actually doing something else. So I know the power that a podcast can have, but I wanted to share with you some stories that way you are motivated to share your podcast, even on those days when it's hard, or even if you feel like, because I know a lot of you have a business-minded podcast, and I've had people tell me, well, I just talk about business. It's not like earth-shattering, groundbreaking. I'm not saving lives and curing cancer. I'm just talking about time management or how to take things to the next level. But I do want to say that you have to look at that through the lens of you don't know who is listening to your show, and what you say could be the one thing, it could be the one glimmer of hope that someone is hanging on to today, and they hear it and they think, wow, if they can do that, I can do that as well. Or maybe a single parent is listening and they are just trying to crawl out of a really dark hole of parenting their children alone. And then they hear your podcast and they think, if they can do this, I can do this too. So that's kind of my take on where we're going today. But like I said, I have 3 stories that I want to share with you today. And I really want you to zoom out and see the bigger impact that your podcast can have. And it's just, I already warned you, I might get emotional, but we're just going to go with it. And whatever happens, happens. Okay. Because the first member, and like I said, these are 3 stories from the Potty People, which if you don't know this is our podcast membership community. So shout out to the members of the Potty People. But Lori she has a podcast called Grief with Grace for Grieving Moms. And I actually met Lori through a coaching session earlier this year. And, we talked over what she was really wanting to do. And Lori, I'm definitely not going to tell her story. She is so much better at doing that. But Lori has lost a child, and she wanted to help other parents who were going through the grieving process for having lost a child. And I thought, wow, that's so specific, because it's not just grieving the loss of anyone in your family. It was very specific to parents. And then she got even more specific and said, I want to speak to grieving moms. And so whenever she decided to put that stake in the ground, I started thinking about how many lives do you think her podcast will impact? Really, how many lives do you think this kind of podcast would impact? Because I zoom out from just Lori, putting her show out there every single week. And I imagine Who's listening to her show? Maybe someone who's going through a very difficult time and they are just looking for ways to cope with life right now, or different ways just to get out of bed in the morning, or to be happy that they had a child in their life for as long as they did. I don't know all of the stories behind Lori and her listeners, but whenever I look at it, I think about, here's her podcast. Let's look at her ripple effect, right? So let's imagine that glass lake again, and she drops her podcast in. We put the stone in, and it's her podcast. And then she reaches one grieving mother. And then that grieving mother can totally have her life changed from the things that Lori says on her podcast, which in turn could go out to another ripple, which affects her spouse and maybe her children, or even her coworkers. Or if you want to go out even further, it could generationally help someone deal with loss or overcome a trauma in a absolutely different way than they would have handled it had they not listened to Lori's podcast. And it could have just been a one-time thing. Like, I'm not even talking about an avid listener who is like all in with Lori and listens to every single thing that she says. I'm talking about a person who is just looking for hope and they stumble across her podcast. Maybe they don't even often listen to podcasts, but they stumble across her show and they're thinking, wow, this is exactly what I needed to hear right now in this moment. And it could absolutely change someone's life. Okay, I told y'all I'm like, don't lose it. Don't lose it, Crystal. But these are the type of things that I think about. And I know that there are people in this community doing these heartfelt podcasts that may not be very easy to talk about, but I wanted to talk about them today because at the end of the day,
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
When I sit down to think about podcasters in this community sharing messages of hope and inspiration and creativity, these are the things that I think about. Or I think about, let's go back to Lori's podcast. Like, what if she has her podcast and there is a grieving sister who listens to it, who needs advice because she doesn't know how to help her sister who has just lost a child, right? Like maybe her child or her sister doesn't even know that this type of podcast exists, but she listens to Lori and then says, oh my gosh, sis, like this is the exact thing that you need right now. Or she could just listen to it herself and find tools and resources to help her family in this time of crisis. So these are the things that I just wanted to share with you. I know this is a totally different episode than what we usually talk about, but I think it's important because at the end of the day, these are the things that matter. This is not about downloads. This is about the why behind your podcast being bigger than yourself. And so the next podcast I want to talk about is Carla. So shout out Carla. She has the Joyful Energetic Mama podcast. And this is one that I love to think about the ripple effects that this could have on children that she is indirectly serving by providing resources for moms. And so let's think about Carla's ripple effect real fast. So she has her podcast, and a mom who maybe is about to lose her sanity. So shout out to all parents out there. Like, you know what I'm talking about, especially if you've been in quarantine, like in 2020, you know what I'm talking about. So she has her podcast, and then she has moms who listen to it. Maybe that's their escape for just a little bit of the day. They're like, I'm just going to go listen to see what Carla is talking about today. And they are inspired. They're motivated. They love hearing Carla's voice. And they're just like, oh my gosh, yes, I can go and show up and be a better mom for my children today because of this podcast. So in retrospect, they become better caregivers. They become happier people after they listen to this show. And then this has the potential to affect generations of people. I know. Maybe you're like, Crystal, that's a really big, like, audacious thing to think that my one podcast, my teeny tiny podcast that isn't very big, is going to affect generations of people. Come on. Like, that just sounds a little ludicrous, right? But it's absolutely true, because I can tell you, I can pinpoint the exact moment I have listened to certain podcast messages. I've watched certain YouTube videos. I have attended certain live events, and I can remember thinking that is the moment my life changed. That is the moment that I decided to flip things up and try something new and try something different, go on a different path than I've always gone. And it was because that one person shared their message with me. So I know it sounds very big and audacious, but I want you to think about these things, because the ripple effect of podcasting is a real thing. It is an absolutely real thing. I want you to think about this for yourself as a podcast consumer. What episodes have affected your life? Like, have they made your life easier? Has it saved you money? Has it saved your marriage? Has it saved your sanity? I actually want you to go write these down whenever we're done with this episode here today. I want you to write down, like, take out your phone and say, these are the top 5 podcasts I remember have affected my life the most. Like 100%. Even better if you can go back and go to the Profit Podcast online community. It's our Facebook group, and tell me which top 5 podcasts have affected your life. You don't have to tell me like all the details of like, oh, it was this exact one and it helped me overcome this and I was going through this bad time. Nothing like that. Just say, yes, I have top 5 episodes that have absolutely helped me in my business, in my life, in my marriage, and they changed my life. Because I know I have so many, like 5 would be so hard for me to come up with, but I want to go into our third story that we're talking about today, and that is Cheryl. So shout out Cheryl. She has Cheryl's Comcast, and that's CALMCAST, Comcast. And Cheryl shares a lot of stories about helping people find their state of calm. She has a fantastic voice. You should absolutely go check out her podcast. She has a fantastic voice. She does a lot of meditative strategies that she helps her community go through on her podcast. And so whenever I think about Cheryl's podcast and how the ripple effect of her show could affect other people, I think of, remember that clear glass lake, right? And we drop in Cheryl's podcast, and then maybe she is talking to a customer service representative who is just trying not to bite off the head of their clients, right? Do you imagine like a customer support person who is feeling a little ragey, and then they find Cheryl's podcast and then it gives them that sense of calm that they've been looking for? So maybe that person would go from someone who's kind of ragey and, maybe they're just all over the place. Maybe they're anxiety ridden, but they find her podcast and then all of a sudden they're a totally different person. They show up to their job, their workplace in a very different way, which could lead to a promotion, which could lead to a better life for this person, which could end up creating generational wealth and benefits for their family. I know, you guys, I know, like, this sounds like a totally audacious way to look at podcasting, but it's how I want you to look at your show, because I would not be sharing any of these stories here with you today had I not started putting out my podcast episodes about podcasting. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started. I had an idea. I had a plan. We all know plans don't always go the way that they're supposed to, but I had this plan, this idea that I wanted to be the person that people go to for podcasting advice whenever they're trying to grow an online business, or they are an online entrepreneur and they wanted to step up their marketing game with a podcast. That was my notion in the beginning. And then stories like these 3 that I share with you here today started trickling in, where I thought I was just talking to people who were creating a business podcast and they were coaches and they had clients, but I had never really zoomed out and absorbed the impact that these podcasts were having on other people's lives. We're talking about grief. We're talking about overworked and overstressed parents. We are talking about people who need to calm their anxiety today. That is a big deal, y'all. That is a huge deal. That if someone were to listen to any of these podcasts here today and have their lives impacted in a positive way, like, it just blows me away. It really does, because I see it. Like, I see this glass lake and I see the different ripples that are dropping in the water anytime someone listens to this podcast, anytime someone, go and they watch one of my YouTube videos, or they, comment on one of my social media posts, whatever the case may be. Anytime someone consumes a piece of content that I have created about podcasting, I see that ripple getting bigger and bigger. And I see that even in my pond, that there are different ripples starting to overtake on different levels. Some of them are bigger, some of them are really small, and some of them have been around for a while and others are brand new. But I want you to create this image in your mind of this beautiful glass lake, and I know it's scary to drop in that first pebble, or to throw it out there and just hope that something happens. But I want you to zoom way, way out from your topic, from your podcast, from your audience. Zoom way out today and see the bigger impact that could potentially be happening behind the scenes on the other end of your microphone. Because I know there's a lot of people in this audience that are terrified to show up behind the microphone. You are scared. You think you're going to sound stupid. You're worried that you don't have enough experience to really talk about the topic that you want to talk about. I know. I hear this all of the time. But at the end of the day, it's not about you. It is about the ripple effect of your podcast. It is about the generations of people that you have the potential to impact just from reaching that one person, that ideal listener that you've been thinking about this whole time. You have the potential to affect one person, and that is what I want you to concentrate on. I want you to keep showing up every single week. And I know I sound like a broken record because I say it all the time, but I want you to keep showing up every single week for your podcast, for your community, for your people, because that ripple effect gets a lot bigger. And I can't wait to hear some of the stories that come from people listening to your podcast, whatever the topic may be. But that's all I have for you today. So go check out the show notes at crystalprofit.com/episode 183. I'm going to link to all of the podcasts that we talked about here today, and I will post this awful drawing that I have made so you can kind of have a visual about what I'm actually saying or what I'm talking about whenever this ripple effect is happening. But like I said in the beginning, go check out the masterclass that is happening right now in real time. I want you to go register if you're interested in creating a digital course for your podcast. That's how you want to monetize your show. You should absolutely go check out the masterclass that's coming up on creating a digital course, and that's going to be linked in the show notes as well. But check out the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 183. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.